long time ago, in a galaxy far, far away, a great adventure took place.
Talking Bird, a special edition.
Hello, and welcome to Talking Bird, the special edition, episode 28. I am your host, Robert Zachary, along with my co-host, John Llewellyn. Hello, John.
Hello.
So do you think we should do a disclaimer for people who might be searching podcasts this week, looking for tips about their turkey that we are not... We are not a.
I guess we could. We could talk some turkey.
We are not aren't talking literal birds.
No, we're not a cooking tips podcast.
We're not gonna have how to get that juicy, delicious brine turkey.
I have no opinion about brine.
Yeah, I is it you just like dip it in a salt bath for a couple days or something?
I don't think you dip it. I think you like put it in a bag or something. I don't know. You do something to cover the bird in. Yeah, it's like water and salt and whatever other spices you want.
I mean, can we just talk turkey?
Then you put something under the skin. I don't know.
Can we just talk turkey and admit that turkey isn't really that great?
I like turkey.
I mean, it's all right.
It's fine. I like it better than chicken.
Oh, really?
Well,
you mean sliced on a sandwich?
Not really. Not literally.
I mean, how often do you just have turkey?
That.
I mean, you go to the store and you buy your turkey, and it's usually sliced in sandwich form, and you have a nice turkey sandwich. But
yeah, I have that. Occasionally, I'll buy some turkey cutlets. Occasionally, I'll buy some turkey sausage. I like turkey sausage better than I like chicken sausage, and I like turkey cutlets better than I like chicken cutlets. But I'll usually buy chicken breast or thighs or something rather than turkey breast or turkey thighs.
But rarely, in like sometime in March, will you just be like, "Honey, I brought a 20-pound turkey home."
No. Never. I'll never buy a whole bird. Occasionally, we'll buy like a rotisserie chicken that'll last us like 3 days, but. Yeah, I'm not going to buy a whole turkey.
I mean, I admit that turkey is a superior as far as like it's not as greasy and it doesn't have, it doesn't seem to have as much fat on it as like say a rotisserie chicken you get at home and you're just like, ugh, it's like nasty. Do you have like a signature Thanksgiving dish that you have to have at the table? Well, you don't have to have, but you'd prefer to have.
I like everything. No, that's not true.
Not true.
I don't like cranberry sauce, really.
I was going to say, I think I remember a conversation from probably a long time ago. Was this? Oh, geez, this is before the podcast about your disdain of fruit pies.
Yeah, no, you and I share for the most part. I've actually softened on that a little bit. But it has to be made a certain way, and it has to be like actually good. But yeah, for the most part, you and I share a distaste for or a antipathy towards fruit pie
of any sort, of any stripe,
or just really just warm, mushy fruit.
Exactly, that was the term
which
I was looking
leads to my dislike of cranberry sauce. But beyond that, I like pretty much everything. This isn't Thanksgiving, but for Christmas. For a long time, we used to, my family, my parents and I, would have Thanksgiving dinner. Would have Christmas dinner with a couple other families that we knew, and one of them they would always make some kind of chestnut dish, and for a long time it was pureed chestnuts, and then after that they would do like roasted chestnuts and Brussels sprouts, and both of those were great. So I like chestnuts with my Thanksgiving or Christmas meals. That's sort of a nice. That's not something you always get, and I do like that. Stuffing, I'm mostly just a big stuffing guy. I like anything that.
Do you like chestnuts in the stuffing? Is that what?
No, I like chestnuts and stuffing. I like carrots. I like sweet potato. I like Brussels sprouts. I'm a big sides guy, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I
can overlook a mediocre turkey if the sides are on it.
See, that's the whole thing. This Thanksgiving always brings up these desserts that they always fall under the ambrosia kind of.
Right.
Is that there's like like sweet potatoes or carrots and marshmallows on top and brown sugar and
it's that.
It's not my.
It's like that Jell-O mold.
I always feel bad
stuck in it or whatever. And mayonnaise on top or whatever. Yeah, no, I'm not into that.
It's like I'm always in my family. It's always they all kind of that's not true. That they don't always respect the fact that I'm kind of a fussy eater. I won't make a big deal out of it. I just will. I've tried to hone it to the point where I can skip it over without making a big deal. But I feel bad when I go over to the in-laws and it's even though they've known me for a long time, it's kind of like, no, not personal. I just, I'm looking at that and it just looks horrible. It just looks horrible. It's like, especially that carrot thing. It looks like you turned over a log or something. Mm-hmm. It's like mold.
Yeah. No, I mean, a lot of the risk of offending potentially some of our audience, some of those like that kind of like Midwestern, like, yeah, we're just going to slather a bunch of mayonnaise on something, or we'll put whipped, not even whipped cream, but some kind of like canned whipped topping on Jell-O and call it like a side dish. Like, I maybe that's not even a Midwestern thing, but I just associate it with it. Like, yeah, I don't know. When I was younger, I liked green bean casserole a lot, and not so much these days.
No, I got a recipe for you if you.
Yeah, no, I'm sure everyone who purchases a can of cream of mushroom soup probably has a recipe for it.
Exactly. But the secret is I put half a pound of Swiss cheese on it.
Oh.
Ugh, gross. Sorry. That's an inside. That's a pre-show. That's a pre-show joke, and I've just made myself nauseous.
So there you go. We have been talking turkey.
I guess we have been talking bird. I guess but clean that cavity. Butter your bird. Make sure it's in there. Don't buy one of those deep fryers. I've never had deep fried turkey, but I can honestly say, regardless of your cholesterol level, your weight, your eating goals in life, you don't need deep fried turkey.
Yeah,
you can skip it. Do it for America. Do it for your health. But since we've talked turkey, we can also talk Star Wars. Because there's, we're going to talk a little bit about Rebels. We're going to get caught up. I'm going to talk about, I played some Battlefront this weekend. We're going to talk a little bit about some comic books. We've got, I've got it right here. That way I don't have to think about it. We are 24 days, 10 hours, 25 minutes, and 55 seconds. I assume I don't know if this is Eastern or Pacific. I'm looking at the Making Star Wars countdown.
It's a very important distinction, Robert. You need to get that correct.
I know. I got to come correct or not come at all.
Frankly, I think it's a little embarrassing for the show that you don't know.
Yeah, I know. I've after last week's what I called the weirdest episode yet, which was a bit of a misnomer. I think I was trying to entice new listeners. It wasn't really that so weird as the
weird
fact.
in the sense that it took us a while to bring it back to Star Wars in the beginning.
Yes, but and also
it's weird Twitter is weird.
It was weird.
It's
Twitter.
like it's not really weird. You're just misspelling some things.
I was still what do they call it? Shell shocked at the fact that I deleted 72 gigs of files.
Yeah.
In a split second, and I couldn't get my backup to work. Which I was
weird.
I know that's pretty. That's like an Adult Swim show right there.
Yeah.
But I was able to restore that. I know you guys are all worried about our archive, because I know a lot of people like to just curl up with some cognac and listen to old Talking Bird episodes.
Yes.
I saved most everything, so we're not as bad off. So this doesn't have to be like the second weirdest episode yet, where I just complain about our legacy and when Disney eventually buys us.
Mm-hmm.
But speaking of Disney buying things,
and so Robert, why are you not involved with Star Wars anymore?
Well, at first it's a bit like a breakup. It's kind of like, first you it's like a total radio silence, and then you drink a couple light beers and you drive past their house and see what they're doing. Yeah. Then you starts to feel weird, so you go back home and some more silence, and then you call their place, and then when they pick up, you hang up, and then you realize that they have caller ID, and then you get real embarrassed. No, basically what I'm referring to and not doing so well is and then there's been some articles going around about the creator himself, George.
Mm-hmm.
Was it George?
Now, is that himself? Is that capitalized?
Yes. George, what is his name? George Winston Lucas or something like that? Oh, I forgot. I actually knew what his little, it's like, jeez. Now I have to look it up. What's his middle name? George Walton Lucas.
George Herbert Walker Lucas.
Thank you. I'm going to smoke those Imperials out of their holes. George Walton Lucas Jr.
Of course.
Born May 14th, 1944 in Modesto, California. Net worth, $5.1 billion. I think this is a bad thing now that I have a computer I can look up stuff. Now I'm distracting myself. So George, we all know he sold his Star Wars part and parcel to Disney. And for a while there, it kind of sounded like pretty much like a marriage made in heaven. Like he was going to be a consultant and they were going to move forward, and he had given them this story synopsis that they were going to use to make these new movies, because he was like, now I'm kind of not a direct quote, but he was just getting too tired of it. It was just like tired of people making fun of like the prequels or whatever. And he was like, I'm just done with it. Time to let somebody else do it. And now it's starting to feel like maybe there might be a little seller's remorse with, at least to the aspects of his involvement in these new movies. I think his involvement is pretty much zero at this point.
Yeah, I think that's probably right.
And, and maybe I'm reading too much into it. There was that Vanity Fair video thing with J.J. Abrams. It was very canned.
From a while ago.
It's very canned, and they pick up the iPad, and it's like Jared Leto and a couple other people like making ha-ha jokes.
This is J.J. Abrams answering questions from celebrities about Star Wars or whatever.
Right, sorry. And then they get around to George, and then George goes like, hey, whatever happened to Darth Vader's grandchildren? And then like J.J. Abrams laughs and kind of goes, I don't know, man. You tell me, George. You made up this shit. And they literally said shit. They have to bleep it.
Right. He's saying it to try to be funny.
And then we all kind of laugh, and it's like, oh yeah, he's because he's been a pretty low profile. It's like
it's funny that he's not giving us any information.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, as time goes on, though, he's starting to like let it slip in interviews that, I got the feeling they didn't want me around, or, selling Star Wars is a bit like a divorce. And I mean, maybe
his story's changing a little bit, right? Because he started out, and he was like, well, I just want to be able to go to the movies and sit and watch a Star Wars movie without worrying about it. Like, I just want to be able to go see what someone else does. And, it's time to give other people a chance, and I want to see what other people do with it. And there's still some of that, I think. But yeah, now it's more like, well, legally, I have no right to do anything with this movie.
Yeah, it's this kind of idea where I think he's almost like, he's trying to, oh, geez, I don't even know what the word, he's not trying to
distance himself necessarily, but
inoculate.
Yeah. And I should, to be fair, I mean, I said he's sort of changing his story. I think pretty much everything he said over time about Star Wars and why he's not doing Star Wars anymore and why he sold Lucasfilm, like, I think it's all true. It just depends on, the answer he gives depends on the audience, and maybe depends on, the point in time. Now we're actually less than a month away from this movie coming out. And so whatever answers he's giving now are, maybe were always true, but now he's just feeling them a little more prominently, right? So the idea that, yeah, he wants to give someone else a chance and he just wants to go sit and watch a Star Wars movie, I think that's still true. He said recently that, he hated doing Star Wars and the fans are always going to complain no matter what. Like, I think that's always been how he felt. I wouldn't, whether that's a fair characterization of fan reaction and of expectations for them, that's maybe a little more debatable. But I think it especially now that those pretty thorough making of the original trilogy books have come out, and we have sort of documented evidence of what Lucas was thinking and feeling, not entirely, but to a greater extent. Those movies were draining on him. Yeah. They honestly were, and he knew it, and that's not a secret. I think that doing those movies was really draining on him, and the original trilogy was draining on him, and that's why he approached the prequel trilogy in a certain way, I think. And so, the prospect of doing more Star Wars, I think, and being the one who, because I think if he was going to be involved in them, he would probably end up directing them anyway, or it would be more like the arrangement of Return of the Jedi, where, yeah, he's letting someone else direct it, but he's going to tell that director how to set up the camera and where to put the camera, where Lucas wants it. So, he's going to tell him, okay, yeah, you're going to direct this Star Wars movie, but here's the way that Star Wars movies are done, and you're going to do that. But I just don't want to have to deal with the day-to-day decisions. So I think that's always been true, and so that's not necessarily new. But yeah, this idea of like, well, I gave them my idea. It was part of the deal. Part of the sale was that I could pitch my ideas. If I'm George Lucas, that he could pitch his ideas, and they could say yes or no. He'd mentioned that before, but it's more like, yeah, they could say yes or no, and they didn't take it, and that's fine. But now, like you said, it's become, there's more of a bitter undercurrent to it, where suddenly we're talking about ex-girlfriends and divorce and hanging out outside of an ex-girlfriend's house, and it's like, what is this? Where is this coming from?
And not to be too gossipy, I mean, I'm trying to remember. I mean, this has come up in every biography of Lucas. Yeah, and I think didn't it come up again in the how Star Wars conquered the universe? Just the idea that how acrimonious his divorce was from Marsha. Oh, yeah.
I mean, he was devastated by that.
He was devastated. It was devastating to him emotionally. It was just kind of devastated the family, because there supposedly there was infidelities involved, and it was somebody within his organization that had hooked up with his wife, and he was the guy that designed the stained glass design that's actually in the on the ranch, that the thing that when you come into it, the light comes through it. So every day he goes to work, he's I mean, it took up half of, supposedly, that divorce is part of the reason that he actually eventually did the prequels, because I think in a lot of respects he was done with Star Wars, but they kind of, at least from what I gathered of these books, is that they kind of said, well, that's great, but you lost, half your money in your divorce, and we're only expecting this much revenue from those 3 movies and assorted things. So Star Wars is essentially kind of dying at that point. So they're like, but if you made 3 more, you'd be set up for life. And and I think he begrudgingly went back to the well and made those. And, it's got to hurt when you put your, essentially 10 years of your life into something, and people are, well, not 10 years. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know the time frame. If you consider it to the special edition is kind of the dry run for the prequel. So from 96 to 2005 or whatever, when that last movie came out.
Mm-hmm.
Going back to that, and then people kind of constantly grousing about it, and then he was kind of done with it again. And he kind of went back to his 1983 position. Like, I'm just going to make small independent films.
Yeah.
And I think
like
someone...
Red Tails.
Yeah, like Red Tails. Like someone kind of came and pointed out, like, that's great, but Star Wars is dying again. So you have 2 options. You either can sell it to somebody, or you can do another trilogy. And I think he was kind of in the early stages of doing that trilogy, when I think either, I don't know, I mean, hopefully we'll find out someday that maybe this was a decision that he made kind of quickly.
Yeah. Which
I always find is like, I mean, I have no idea what it would like to have something that you created out of your own mind that, is $1 billion empire, and then just to decide. I mean, I've sold personal items in my, in my things that were like collectible that might have sentimental value that actually were worth money. And it was like, you have to outweigh your emotional connection. Like, I could get all this money for this thing, or I could just sit on it and like, oh, this is, I possess this wonderful thing that I'm not really doing anything with. And I think what Lucas might have done is he kind of just thought, what's the worst thing? It's like when somebody gets rid of some great old antique piece of furniture that somebody handed down to them, and at first they're like, oh, it's so elating, I don't have to like find a place for this every time I move. But then it's like, then you go, oh, that was this important thing that I had, that was handed down from family to family, or I could have handed it down to my kids or something. And, I wonder if that's kind of what it's like. I think about a lot about Gene Roddenberry, who Gene Roddenberry survived many years after Star Trek was essentially not his call. I mean, he was kept on in an advisory role for a very long time. Yeah. The problem with that is that within that studio that he was near the end there, he was widely regarded as like the person that you should ignore.
Right.
And he would constantly like corner producers and directors and even stars with his ideas and long reams of notes and stuff. And Roddenberry's health was not great in the later parts of his year. So mainly it was just him kind of stuck out in his office, which would keep getting moved out and out further on the lot, and him writing these memos for people to consider that would get kind of thrown in the trash. So I guess my point is that in some ways I think this is a good thing for George, that he doesn't have any say, and that he knows exactly where he stands with Disney, because he can kind of inoculate himself from the criticism, which I think it's a thing where I think he takes, me, and I'm making a huge logical jump because I don't know the man's mind, but I honestly think that the criticism hurt way more than the praise ever felt good for him. So it's like, in some way, these comments are kind of like, maybe he's been getting a lot of media requests lately, because maybe people haven't quite picked up on maybe some outlets or something don't realize that he is not involved in the decisions of Star Wars anymore, and maybe this is his way of kind of putting it out there that like, hey, quit sending me media requests for interviews. Although he is doing the interviews. I mean,
yeah, I'm kind of surprised that he's still a presence. I mean, he's still agreeing to interviews to promote this movie, as opposed to his museum or whatever else he's got going on these days.
Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like some people. I was listening to another Star Wars podcast, and they were discussing the same thing, which is why I wanted to kind of do my turn.
Mm-hmm. No, it's worth it.
Is that they some of the guys kind of thought it was a little sad, just kind of made them sad. Not that he was sad, but part of them thinks that they feel like he's getting a chance to kind of. He's using this promotion cycle to kind of stick his finger in the eye of Disney for one last turn. Yeah. It's kind of, I think this is the last time that, the Lucas part of the equation will ever be referred to as much. I mean, I don't really know how I'm articulating. It's like, he doesn't have anything to do with Rebels, at least as far as I could tell, but
right.
He was basically a big mentor to Dave Filoni.
Mm-hmm.
So in a lot of ways, Dave is kind of he's that thread of the Lucas style of storytelling. A guy, he literally kind of opened up the books and showed him how he does things. But even then, the show that they worked on together was immediately ended.
Mm-hmm. And
this new one is is definitely a lot different in certain aspects to, the Clone Wars or whatever. So I don't know. It's just like after this, you probably won't be hearing a lot from George in any way, shape, or form after this, because this is kind of like.
Yeah, I mean, I can't imagine him coming out and doing press for Rogue One. Like, what is he going to have to say about it?
Right.
Other that he isn't already saying now. I mean, it's to pick up on your point, when we talked about Lawrence Kasdan last week, part of that interview that he did for Entertainment Weekly or whatever it was, he was talking to Lucas and Kathleen Kennedy at the very beginning. This was 2012, so right around the time of the sale, but and he basically was given his pick of Lucas's ideas that he wanted to pick up on. So, Lucas was involved in, pretty early on. But then once the sale goes through, the contract says what it says. And, it's Disney's right. It's Kathleen Kennedy's right to move on in whatever way she sees fit. And then you have this Lucasfilm story group that is going to, do whatever they want. And so there are a couple of things going on here that I think are sort of interesting. And I'm not, I think as we've been talking about, there's some bitterness and maybe some sour grapes with Lucas. But, when in the interview that we're referencing from this past week, when he says why he's done with Star Wars, one of the things he said was, people forget that Star Wars is meant to be like a soap opera about these family members. It's not just about spaceships. And I think that's true. And especially when you look at Lucas's original ideas and how convoluted it was,
right?
You can kind of see that that's what he was going for. This kind of, every week there's a new revelation that, changes the relationships between people, and so is this person's father, and so is that person's, it was knew that person, but the other person didn't know it. There's all those kinds of revelations and just those convoluted relationships that are, very much like, the soap opera. I mean, when the term space opera is essentially a space soap opera, and so that is in fact what he was going for. And it's not just about the spaceships. He certainly used that setting because it appealed to him. And so, I wonder specifically if, some of his reaction is about, I was thinking specifically about like the Millennium Falcon and the fact that they're bringing it back, and how it's, it's essentially a character unto itself now. And, J.J. Abrams talking about like, oh my God, I got to, sit in the Millennium Falcon cockpit, and, it appealing to that, a lot of the marketing that J.J. Abrams is certainly part of, is appealing to that kind of fan and nostalgia. Not just, and a lot of that nostalgia is, from Lucas's point of view, I could easily see, from a certain point of view, point of view, I could see it easily. I'm saying, like, well, why is there all this nostalgia for, like, the Millennium Falcon? The movies were never supposed to be about it. This was just a ship, and certainly the Millennium Falcon was a key piece to understanding Han Solo's character, but Star Wars trilogy is not about Han Solo, not really. He's sort of he's a secondary character. He's someone that this core family picks up along the way, and the core story picks up along the way. And so that kind of fetishism of Millennium Falcon or the TIE Fighter, they've redone the TIE Fighter, and this is what the TIE Fighters look now, and isn't that cool? From George Lucas's point of view, I could see him saying, like, well, why is that interesting? Like, that shouldn't be what's driving this story. And the other piece of that is, or a related piece of that could be, the fact that the Lucasfilm Story Group is developing this wide overarching, storyline, canon, whatever. Some of the folks who are on that story group, got their kind of start in Star Wars, or they, what drew them to Star Wars, or their involvement, started out with the role-playing games or the video games or, the TV shows and the comic books that were about expanding, the universe out beyond just, the core Skywalker family soap opera. And so again, I could see George Lucas saying, like, well, why is that? Who cares about that? Even with something like Rebels, where it's keeping that kind of style and tone that Lucas helped initiate with the Clone Wars. I guess not last week, but 2 weeks ago, the episode about Hera and the B-Wing, that was maybe not based entirely, but it was based in part on, this, an old West End Games mission, the role-playing game, story or mission or whatever they were called. And we're about the B-Wing, and why did, from George Lucas's point of view, I could see him saying, like, well, why do people care where the B-Wing was invented? That's not what's important here. And so the whole focus and the nostalgia for, I could see George Lucas saying, or thinking that people were being nostalgic for the wrong parts of Star Wars, right? And this is, again, where George Lucas is talking about people criticizing the movies, no matter what he does, or no matter what anyone does. I think in part it was because, for George Lucas, he was telling the story of the Star Wars, and the story of Star Wars was always meant to be sort of one thing. Whether that's actually true, I think, is, again, somewhat debatable. But in his mind, at least, he always had sort of the core idea of what it should be. And that change, for other people outside of that process, we came to love the Millennium Falcon, or we wanted audience expectations for what Star Wars is. What makes something feels like Star Wars is not the same thing that George Lucas thinks is what makes something Star Wars. And so, that disconnect, I think, is what he's responding to. And, the idea of him selling the franchise, selling Lucasfilm and the Star Wars property, I think he did, as you say, maybe face the prospect of, maybe trying to do more movies, and he has a new family now, and he's certainly much older, and because those movies are so draining on him, I think he saw by the time the third movie in the trilogy's out, he's going to be at least in his late 70s, I think, right?
Yeah, he's 71 right now.
Yeah. So by 2019 or whenever episode 9 comes out, that's going to be, I can't imagine him thinking that was fun. He didn't think making Star Wars was all that fun in 1977. I can't imagine him thinking it's going to be fun in 2017. And so,
but there's always this caveat when people talk about that, and I totally agree that experience in 76, 77 was an emotionally draining situation where they you know, he was like, I don't want to ever direct another Star Wars movie again kind of situation. But then again, he would always keep saying, I have to make my movie. I have to make my movie.
Right.
And there was that.
He wants it done a certain way. And now that he doesn't have control of it, I think is sort of, he's getting annoyed again at that disconnect between what he thinks is what makes a Star Wars movie and what other people think makes a Star Wars movie.
Right.
Because the story group, you know, they're incorporating a lot of this EU stuff that he didn't care about, and he was like, whatever, I'm going to make my thing. And so now that's considered like official Star Wars, I think that may be what's getting him a little annoyed. The shift in focus away from, you know, even not even like his specific idea, but the shift in focus away from the Skywalker family specifically, and this kind of family soap opera, this family drama.
Yeah, because I was at a store and I kept thinking to mention this on the show that I was at a bookstore and they had like, you know, the split. It was kind of a time when I was talking about this like August or September, like they had all this art stuff out promoting the new movie. But when there was like a calendar and it's like, well, the picture's not a single shot from the movie in this. It's all just photoshopped character stuff. Well, they also had a book with all the kind of like a synopsis of the first 6 movies, and they called it like the complete Skywalker saga collection.
Yeah,
this idea that now they're going to be separating out, like, yeah, the focus of this is not going to be, you know, Darth Vader, and which is kind of strange considering that like you see Darth Vader's mask in the trailer, and there's all this speculation that this is, but it's just the idea that they're compartmentalizing this experience. I mean, I think in some ways that's a good thing, because I mean, that way you don't kind of, you know kind of what George was responsible with before, and everything else has kind of moved on. I mean, there's really no way, either through a financial agreement or through death or whatever. It's like eventually he was not going to be in control of this. So in some ways, it's an ultimate form of control that he could choose who is going to carry on his legacy. Now, I understand everybody doesn't like the idea that somehow, you know, well, you're not in control anymore. We're just going to go someplace so quickly. You know, it's that idea where it's like, oh, you know, maybe they'd make one movie based on my ideas, and then they would slowly kind of work away. This seems to be I would get to work with them on shaping, okay, now that we've set this first movie in motion, like, here's where the rest of the story goes. Yeah, that kind of idea where he could sit in an easy chair with a cup of coffee, and, you know, J.J. Abrams and Lawrence Kasdan are sitting there with notepads, and they'll be like, all right, well, tell me, you know, what is Luke doing with himself now? Well, actually, you know, I would think that he would do X. That kind of, I think he was maybe hoping he was going to get to do a little bit of that, because I know a lot of, George is an idea guy. He's not, he hates writing, he hated writing those scripts. And I think the only aspect that he likes talking about is he only likes talking about the story. I don't think he really likes talking about the phenomenon. I don't think of it, because then he would have Rick McCallum do that for him in the prequel era. You know, Rick was the enthusiasm and the fan connection that George just emotionally, you know, either him personally or his generation or whatever. Just he's not gonna be the guy showing up at, you know, Star Wars weekends and, you know, taking pictures with the kids and like, oh, let's all just joke around, or I'm gonna go to a midnight screening and, you know, wear a Darth Vader helmet and yank it off, and, you know, because I mean, Rick McCallum did some of that stuff. I mean, he would curse and stuff like that. Like, oh, you guys are fucking awesome and stuff. You know, and Rick, of course, was unceremoniously let go from Lucasfilm a few years ago, and we still haven't. I've never heard his take on it about, you know, maybe he was paid so much he doesn't have an opinion anymore. But I mean, there's something to be said about when you get far away from the source of the history. I mean, discounting the ideas are his, the Millennium Falcon was a sculptor or a kit basher when he said, make it look like a hamburger, and he made a spaceship like a hamburger. So that's why he probably doesn't have that kind of connection to it. It's one of these. It's one of those situations where the only my idea, which will never happen, but it's my idea, is that so George doesn't want to sit on film sets anymore. He's got a kid. He's got a whole museum in whatever. I don't know what George Lucas is day to day. I've heard rumors he's actually a little bit more bored than you would think because, when you're in your 70s and you're worth $5 billion, if you don't hire someone to help you around the house with your kid, you're being silly. You know what I mean? It's kind of like, why not make the...
I should note for the record that neither Robert or I have children.
I mean, if I could have had an assistant, maybe I would have had a kid.
Yeah,
but my point is,
fair.
It's like, what George needs to do? He needs to get on the phone, call up like an Alan Dean Foster, or even better, a Timothy Zahn. Say, come fly here, come to Chicago. We're going to sit in my office, and I'm going to tell you I'm going to tell you what my trilogy was going to be, and we're going to craft this together into 3 books. And, maybe kind of after, maybe they kind of wait, a couple years after episode 7 comes out or episode 8, when people are kind of like, well, this is Star Wars now. And then he can kind of come out, and maybe he wouldn't want to do this because it's like, it wouldn't be heralded like his movies would have been, but at least he would have an opportunity to have his say, and there's always going to, have a trilogy of books. He doesn't have to write them. He can just sit there and write and tell the outlines, and Zahn can come back and say, oh, this is what I did with it. And like, no, change this. And then he can get his stories out there, and then at least he can feel like, at least his version of it would be on the marketplace in some way. And there would always be people that would be like, oh, this was way better than the Disney trilogy.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know if he's given up all rights to these characters. So all it would take was a phone call from Disney to be like, no, you're not going to get to do that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, so I would say that I also have sort of 2 related thoughts on this. One, I mean, thinking about George Lucas's comments, I think or at least I hope, I won't even say I hope because that's sort of like condescending, but at least for me personally, it's a chance to say like, yeah, okay, that's a little bitter, and maybe bringing up ex-girlfriends is not the move, but in terms of what he's saying at its core, that it needs to be a focus on the story and a focus on the relationships in his family, and not a focus on like, let's make some spaceships that look cool. Then, yeah, a lot of the marketing that we're seeing for episode 7 and certainly Rogue One, it's like, oh, wow, they're bringing back maybe Tarkin and Darth Vader, or they hired the guy who sculpted Darth Vader's helmet, and maybe they're going to be making the original style Stormtrooper uniforms, or look how we updated the Stormtrooper uniforms now so they look like iPads.
Right.
That's not... from his perspective, that's not what this is supposed to be. And so, maybe it's a chance to think about how not just we're consuming the advertising for this movie, but, how we eventually consume the movie itself. And what's going to make it a good movie isn't like whether they use the original Stormtrooper helmets or not. It's going to be, does the story work? Do the relationships between the characters work? And honestly, that... to the extent that people criticize the prequels, that's what they criticize, that, it seemed like it was more of a focus on, the world building aspect rather than, getting the script right and getting, the relationships between the characters to make sense in any way. So there's the irony there. But, when we watch Rogue One, or when we watch episode 7 or 8 or the Han Solo movie, it's going to be, what's going to make them good movies or not, or fun movies or not, is going to be in part like, all right, does the script make sense? Does this, does the relationship between these characters, is that even something that I care about? And then the other piece of that then is, I lost it. I lost what the other piece of it was.
Yeah, it makes me, well, these kind of conversations remind me of a posture that I kind of gave up several months ago about this idea of J.J. Abrams. And like, you go back through older shows, I was very kind of hostile to the concept of J.J. Abrams directing this movie. And then I softened because I started seeing clips and things, and I was like, and I got excited. But then now I've kind of gone back to that idea because I start thinking about him as a filmmaker, and that he is a craftsman. He obviously has a great visual style. He knows how to physically make a movie. But the problem with everything that J.J. Abrams movies have ever been is that they have a hollow emotional center. They have a certain kind of superficiality to them that helps expose the narrative weaknesses. It's like going back and revisiting Star Trek, the first one, which I actually thought was a slam dunk when I first saw it. And now I'm kind of like, I watch it now, and I all I kind of see are the weird pacing. I see product placement. I see these weird things that kind of betray the world of Star Trek, and it keeps taking you out of it and returning you to your world. And I wonder how much of that he's going to be comfortable with in these movies, Yeah. And like this, Super 8 was another movie of his, which was trying to be a very, it was like a love letter to movies like, E.T. and Explorers and even to some extent like The Goonies or whatever. Just that kind of childhood adventure, and how on the surface that's what it was. But unfortunately he shortchanged a lot of the relationships in that movie, and eventually it became an unsatisfying experience to have watched. And I have never revisited it because my nostalgia didn't even last through the whole movie. It was kind of like, you're just like, wait a second, really? This was what this was all about? And I worry that that's what we're going to do, is like, it's going to start out that this Force Awakens is going to be like a boom, drop you into a new world, into this world that you essentially haven't been in 30 plus years, because it is the world. Yeah. It's not the prequel world. It's the universe that,
Right. Episode 7 comes after episode 6, not episode 3.
Exactly. And that's a big line of delineation, because it's like, for a long time they, Star Wars, it tended to have more of that. There was more prequel information out there than anything. I mean, all the books were prequels. All the the comics had gone to the prequels. The cartoons were the prequels. That's the universe that had been in existing yet, and so people have been kind of hungering for this. But then it's like, once you get in it, and once you kind of get your bearings, will this be something? Will The Force Awakens be a movie that dovetails into the Star Wars quote experience, or are we merely making a sequel to, is it going to be Bryan Singer's Superman Returns, or was that what it's called? Superman, which people piss all over Zack Snyder's Man of Steel, like, why did they give this to this guy? I have people that love Superman gone rants. Now, that movie has tons of problems. Yeah. But you have to give the guy credit for trying something different. When Bryan Singer made his love letter to Richard Donner, and it came up flat. I mean, he got it right. Brendan Routh is a perfect continuation of the Superman that Christopher Reeve obviously physically couldn't play. Right. Either he'd have been too old at that point, and of course he'd passed away by then, but his physical issues. And I think about that because it's like being a child of that era, you know, how much Superman was never as important as Star Wars to me, but it was an important thing. And so when I realized how much Singer loved those first two Superman movies, and then that was his thing, but he got it wrong. You know, it's like he didn't pick up on it the right way, or the times have changed. You know, you can't just, you know, and I think there's a lot of, you know, there's going to be a lot more of gender representation, you know, ethnic representation, which is great. But there's also more to it than that. You know, he's fixing some of the problems with the original trilogy, just because it was made by a baby boomer white guy from Modesto who, you know, I don't think he was like, you know, my whole thing is to try to have as least amount of minorities in my space movie as possible. Right. I don't think that was his, you know, again, I'm putting words in the guy's mouth, but I think it was just that kind of, you know, kind of just that he wasn't thinking of, it wasn't like a concern to him at the time. And to be perfectly honest, it wasn't part of the culture as it is now, where we talk about it constantly. And I mean, I think that's a good thing, but it just literally was not a conversation that was a common conversation. It usually was just kind of like, you know, the more literary film critics would take him to task for things like that. But generally it was a thing where, you know, well, you know, whatever. Yeah. I just hope that JJ can get into the idea of what really make it's like, oh, you just don't take the visuals and then redress them and then think, well, we'll figure out the story later, you know?
Yeah, right. And J.J. Abrams has said in an interview that he has made movies like that a little bit, like in Star Trek Into Darkness and what was the other one? I can't remember the other one, but Super 8 maybe. But, you know, that where the story maybe wasn't completely nailed down by the time they started shooting. But, you know, he contrasted that with Episode 7, that in this case the story was nailed down and the script was pretty much nailed down.
But then there's those images of them sitting on the dock.
I know, right. When you know, he and Kazan were still working out some story beats during filming.
And to me, that's the number one problem when a movie says that it started filming without a completed script. But
yeah, so I remember the other thought I had, which is that again, thinking about George Lucas, we'll just call it complaining that you know, to him, Star Wars was always about, you know, this kind of family drama, this soap opera, rather than just about cool spaceships. It kind of does make me wonder what then the storyline of Episode 7 specifically, but the new trilogy in general is going to be like. You know, obviously Mark Hamill is involved and Carrie Fisher's involved and Harrison Ford's involved, you know, in this one, but how much is that really driving the story? You know, there are all these rumors about characters being related to any of the Skywalkers and or even just other random characters from the original trilogy. And, you know, I'm sure I would guess at least one of the new characters is, but, you know, maybe that's not as big of a piece of this new trilogy, or at least, you know, maybe that family specifically isn't the focus. That, you know, that family is involved in this larger story, but it's not about that family specifically, that, you know, the Skywalkers. And so, you know, maybe it's something to think about some of these rumors we've been hearing and speculation about what these movies are going to be like, and maybe some of that isn't what we thought it was. If George Lucas is feeling like they moved away from the focus on the Skywalker family,
right?
And you were talking about, you know, J.J. Abrams and how he was taking this. You know, my impression, again from what we talked about last week a little bit with J.J. Abrams, is that, you know, he wanted to make Episode 7 as kind of a standalone, you know, a bit able to be a standalone movie like Episode 4 was, and that Rian Johnson, you know, has much more say over sort of the broader arc of 7, 8, and 9. And so, I mean, really, in some ways, it's kind of up to Rian Johnson, I think, where he wants to take this after episode 7, where he is going to be taking it after episode 7. And maybe that's where it's even going to drift away from the Skywalker story even more than it already is.
Yeah, and there's something to be said about that. I mean, I think making a sequel to anything is just, it's like, it's almost an insurmountable task. I mean, there's the old thing where they go, when the old archive interview where they talk to Irvin Kershner about the day that Lucas had offered The Empire Strikes Back to him, and because Kershner had been an instructor at the school, so he essentially taught Lucas,
right?
And very deftly, I think he went back. Well, this is a story about people learning, so why don't I go back to my old teacher? And his response was, well, I don't know, George, I don't think that's such a good idea. And then, like, I guess he came to it because his agent was like, are you insane? This is going to be the biggest sequel of all time. But there is a certain filmmaker that has come up a lot with this idea that, there's a certain artistic impulse into bringing something bringing it from nothing into creating it. And the idea that, A New Hope, had never existed before this. It's not, it's not an adaptation. So he creates this whole world. I mean, episode 4, everybody, they could have stopped making films and that still would have been a great film because it didn't, yes, there's questions at the end. What happens to Darth Vader? Will Luke become a Jedi? But actually not. That's not even a question because we know he's got the lightsaber because that's all it really requires in the thing to know. It's like, well, he's got the lightsaber now, and he used the Force once, so essentially he's going to become a Jedi. So that being said, they could have stopped. So making a sequel is hard, and there's a certain kind of situation in Hollywood where everybody wants a George Lucas until they don't. They want a guy that can kind of create a world, and they want him to do and they like, Joss Whedon did the Avengers, and it was like, it did gangbusters. And then they go, okay, let's do a sequel. Well, guess what? The sequel wasn't, nearly as satisfying to people. I thought it was a very weak film. I think a lot of people agreed that it just, Star Trek, even though 10 minutes ago I'm talking about how emotionally hollow it was a great ride. Especially if you were a Star Trek fan, there was a lot of touchstones to that, even though it didn't have an emotional center. Well, look at Into Darkness, which he tried to catch lightning in a bottle again, and he completely, screwed it up. The guy, there's a director he did. I think it's Matthew Vaughn. I think is the guy who did it. Who did, he did X-Men First Class, and when he left X-Men Days of Future Past or whatever really quickly into the production, and then he went. I think he also didn't he direct Kick-Ass, and he didn't return for the sequel. And people have said, "Oh, is he only the first in the series kind of director?" And that might very well be true. And I think maybe J.J. Abrams, I guess finally getting around to my point, is that maybe J.J. Abrams works better if he's the first guy out of the gate. But he's not going to be there at the second lap. He's going to move on because that is not... I think he likes the idea of bringing these things into existence. But then I think once you get past that, then maybe his ideas aren't, even for him, as satisfying. Like, yeah, well, I've already got them here. I've got Rey, I've got Finn, I've got, BB-8, I've got all these Kylo Ren. It's like after we figure out what's going on with them, and I got a chance to play in the sandbox, I don't maybe there's nothing left for him to say. So right. I don't think it's a situation where he's maybe, I want to be the next George Lucas, but they won't let me because they don't want to deal with another George Lucas. I think it's a thing where he literally has said, I'm not going to be the George Lucas of this. Right. You can, I got to move on, more power to you, get somebody else.
I think he mentioned that he is a producer, an executive producer on episode 8. right? And he's like, well, it's episode, I'm a producer on it, so I hope that movie does well too. But I think that's as far as it goes. And I don't, I don't think he's going to have a ton of input on that movie. I think he'll be kind of around to like maybe deal with practical questions or like, oh, how is this going to fit? Or, what do we want to do here? Or how did you do it? But I don't think he'll be as involved even with episode 9 and certainly not any of the, spin-off movies. So, yeah, I mean, I don't think he doesn't want to be the George Lucas of Star Wars, to the extent that, I mean, there's not even really one person who is going to be the George Lucas of Star Wars anymore. It's going to be Kathleen Kennedy on the production side of it. It's going to be the Lucasfilm Story Group on the story side of it, and then whatever directors they bring in on that, and writers on that side of it. And so they're basically taking everything that George Lucas used to do himself and splitting it up amongst 5 or 6 or 7 or 8 people.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's like the old story about some guy going into retirement at some company, and he comes back to say hello, and it finds out there's 3 people doing his job.
Right.
It's like, oh, yeah, because you were It's like you were responsible for so much.
Right.
We had to get 3 people. Yeah, I mean,
once you left, there was no one else who knew how to do everything involved with your job, so we had to hire multiple people to cover it.
And obviously, Simon Kinberg is involved in that to some.
Sure.
Yeah,
he's on the story group side.
It's amazing how much he is connected. Kinberg is connected to like the movies that come out now. It's like his name is on everything. It's like, wasn't he was involved in the Days of Future Past. He was involved X-Men First Class, the Fantastic Four, Rebels, The Martian. I swear he had a story.
He's hot. He's got the juice.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know.
The juice right now.
He was also involved in Chappie, the Neil Blomkamp flop, which I saw this weekend. And to be perfectly honest, it was better than people say it was. It definitely has problems.
It would almost have to be, I would think.
But people just, people are so, I don't. This isn't movie talk podcast, but I will say that
it sort of is.
It kind of is. Sorry, guys. Everybody loved him, District 9, and then he made Elysium, which he has a very simplistic story, but the special effects are so good. It almost kind of like makes you kind of like sidestep the super simplistic story. And also it wasn't a horribly simplistic story, and its heart was in the right place. I mean, it's a story about the haves and the have-nots, and sometimes a simple story, well told, can usurp this complex, balanced story where everybody's backstory. And Chappie was like one of this kind of situations where it was like, it's Johannesburg in some time in the future, and it kind of is a dirty, nasty place. And I mean, Chappie's going to be one of those movies like in 20 years, people are going to go back to it and go, God, did you know they made this movie about a robot with a soul, and they cast these like insane South African hip hop artists like to star in this movie? And they actually had at the time one of the biggest stars in the world in the movie, but they gave him a tiny part, like because Hugh Jackman's in it, and it's just like he almost doesn't even need to be in the movie. He just plays a quote bad guy. But it's just amazing. I guess my point is that Kinberg seems to have his finger in every movie pie there is now.
He's got the juice.
He's got the juice.
He's got a lot of juice. He's got the goods.
I guess I could have saved us all from hearing that if I had just agreed with you the first time you said he's got the juice. Exactly.
That's all right.
So we want to get on Rebels, or do we want?
Yeah. So since we've been talking about sort of what Star Wars is and shifts in the story and the canon, let's move to Rebels. We haven't talked about it in a couple weeks, so I guess we can catch up. the last 3 episodes: Brotherhood of the Broken Horn, Wings of the Master, and then Blood Sisters, which was aired last week. So just briefly, Brotherhood of the Broken Horn is where Rex and Kanan are both sort of vying for Ezra's time in terms of training to be a Jedi, training to be a soldier, and he is sort of frustrated with both, and so he and Chopper go off on their own to answer a distress call, which he thinks is from their old acquaintance Vizago from season 1. It turns out to be Hondo from the Clone Wars, and so Ezra kind of pretends to be a smuggler for a little bit, a scoundrel kind of guy, and then he ends up sort of realizing that no, he wants to follow more of the Jedi path and wants to keep on his training. Wings of the Master is where Phoenix Squadron, the group of rebels that the crew of the Ghost has aligned themselves with, they're having trouble getting through this Imperial blockade to deliver relief supplies to a planet. Again, Captain Rex has a contact, so Hera goes to Shantipole, where Shipmaster Quarry has designed this new ship, which is the B-Wing. It's a prototype B-Wing, and so Hera goes. She's the only one, seemingly, who has been able to land on Shantipole and survive. And so she takes it out for a test flight, and Quarry says, yes, you're the one who can fly this ship. And so she takes it back. She breaks the blockade. She gets promoted to Phoenix Leader so that she can train other pilots and assign them different tasks. And so the Blood Sisters starts off with Hera giving Sabine a task to go pick up a spy or some kind of informant and take them to what ends up being Alderaan. But along the way, I guess Ezra goes with Sabine, and along the way, Sabine runs into one of her old acquaintances, one of her old friends, one of her blood sisters, and who is a bounty hunter and trying to get the same information that Sabine has, and so they end up both trying to escape the Imperials, and that's essentially all that happens in that one. So what's interesting to me is that we knew before the season started that we were going to get a lot more backstory on the main characters, and it seems like now they're just giving them their own separate episodes. So there was the Ezra episode where he goes off on his own with Hondo. There is the Hera episode where she gets the B-Wing, and now there's a Sabine episode. And I think there will be at least one more Sabine episode, because one of the clips from, I think the trailer, where the season 2 preview was Sabine talking about her clan from Mandalore, and that wasn't in this episode. So there's at least one more, I think, Sabine heavy episode to come. But they're kind of putting these characters off on their own to sort of explore who they are outside of the context of the Ghost crew, and then I assume at some point later on in the season they're going to bring them all back together and sort of build on those experiences and build on who they are and have them work together as a group. It's also interesting to me that none of these 3 episodes had a real B story. It was just A story the whole way. There was no secondary plot, secondary story that could, break up the first story, which I guess is not that unusual for Rebels, but usually there's more going on than just like the main story. There tends to be anyway. Maybe not though. Maybe I'm off on that. But what did you think of these 3 episodes?
Well, I have to say that there was aspects of the first. I mean, I liked the Brotherhood of the Broken Horn story. Mm-hmm. The only one that didn't work for me was Blood Sisters.
Yeah.
I think the reason that we're not finding a B story with these is that I think essentially that in and of themselves, all 3 of these could have been B stories to another story.
Yeah.
It's kind of, it would have been actually, I mean, I know they're constrained to a 22-minute kind of thing, but it's almost like it would have actually better behooved them if they had kind of, maybe Wings of the Master and Blood Sister were like kind of edited together into a longer episode, because there was a lot of, there wasn't a lot of suspense in any of them. I mean, a lot of the Broken Horn thing, it's kind of it's a story based on a deception about Ezra telling this guy that he's Lando Calrissian, and it's
right. He gives a fake name and he says he's Lando Calrissian.
And then this character that Hondo, was from the Clone Wars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know. It's Wings of the Master. I liked it. It just felt, I don't know. It just felt a little thin. I mean, Blood Sisters was real thin. It was super thin.
There was also with Blood Sisters, there was a weird, like the timing of it was off. Like they were like someone would say a line and then there would be, and then the other character would deliver their line. Like the audio editing of it was off a little bit.
It's so funny.
And I don't know if that's because they were running a little short and that's how they filled the time, or if they got the B or the C team on this episode, on that side of it. But
yeah, it's kind of.
I think
there's that weird, all this
audio editing off kind of threw everything else off for me.
Yeah. Sorry, the minute you're talking about that, then you started cutting out a little bit. So I thought you were trying to demonstrate audio.
No.
Yeah, it's just they had a ton of room for exposition and they didn't take it. It almost makes me wonder.
You really didn't learn that much about Sabine. Yeah,
I mean, in all those pauses, we could have learned a lot about their relationship, even though they talk for a bit. I forget. Was that what was the name of the other character?
Tetsunonyo, something like that.
And it was that what's her face, from Archer. Did she do the voice?
Oh, I don't know. Now that you mention it, I'm not sure who did that voice.
Oh, now I'm blanking on her. Anyway, well, you don't learn enough about her to be kind of make it that big of a deal anyway. But
right. I mean, she'll be back because they even like make a point at the end of the episode of saying, "Oh, I wonder if we'll be seeing her again." I think we probably will. Just like
I think that's my problem with it, because when we, starting with the siege at Lothal and the clones, those stories were very, I don't want to say grown up, but they were more mature kind of stories where I could see where I started to believe, not being a huge fan of that first season, seeing like Siege of Lothal and these other episodes, like I finally started to feel like, okay, this is Star Wars enough that I can kind of, overlook some of the childish conceits of it being a Disney animated kind of thing. And I think, okay, well, we're telling you, it's not a child story. It's not a grown up story. It's a kind of a universal story. And then with, even with the Broken Brotherhood of the Broken Horn, even with that, it started. I felt like it all started kind of backpedaling into this kind of sugary, childish thing. Like it would have been something that literally would have been more appealing to like a 6 or 7 year old. Like the ideas were super simplistic, and just like the idea that. Sabine's nemesis kind of switches on a dime. Like her whole idea, like they established this idea like, well, we used to be sisters in this same organization, but you're now in my way, and so that that doesn't matter anymore. And then it's like, then she switched to one little, it looks like we're going to team up together, just like the old days kind of attitude, and you're just like, well, that was way too easy.
Yeah.
Couldn't they just?
Yeah, she did kind of switch to being like, yeah, okay, I'll let you go. I won't, even though I'm working for Black Sun. Like, I'll just let you go. I
will say I do like I like that Black Sun reference again, because
which I think, did they bring Black Sun into Clone Wars too?
Yes, yeah. The Falleen characters are in there too. Which if you're not a super in-depth fan, that's Black Sun and the Falleen
that originated in Shadows of the Empire.
Yeah, which was a kind of a prequel book that took place between Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, and it
wasn't just a book. This was like late 90s. Was this before or after the special editions?
This is it was
before
the special editions.
There was a video game, there was a book, there was a soundtrack.
It's a good soundtrack.
There were the comic books probably.
Yep.
Right. So this was their way of like, well, we're not making a Star Wars movie, but we'll make a bunch of Star Wars content around the same story, so it's like we're putting out a movie.
Yeah, I mean they went to great pains to go, this is essentially like having another Star Wars movie.
Right.
And
it's a multi-platform event.
I mean, and to be perfect,
which is fine.
And to be perfectly honest, it wasn't like the story itself wasn't so big that it could have been another Star Wars movie, but it was a nice diversion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So real quick to get back to your question. So you were thinking of Aisha Tyler?
Yeah. Was it
Archer?
not?
This was not her doing.
Sorry.
Ketsu Onyo. Ketsu Onyo was voiced by Gina Torres.
Oh, Gina.
Who's on Suits. She was on Hannibal. She was on Revenge.
Firefly. She's on Firefly.
Yeah, Firefly and Serenity.
That's why I knew the voice sounded familiar.
She's done a bunch of TV. I'm sure you have seen her on some TV show.
I know
she did Alias.
I know Gina Torres. Yeah,
you have she was on a season of 24. So people listening, you have either seen or heard her voice on some TV show. She was on Hercules: The Legendary Journeys. She did an episode of NYPD Blue. She did a couple episodes of Law and Order. She did an episode of Mantis. She did the TV movie of Mantis.
Oh. She wasn't on that Cleopatra 2023 or whatever it was.
Yes, she was. Cleopatra 2525. She was Helen Carter.
I've never seen that. I've just seen ads for that show. It was like a kind of... It was the same time that they were making Andromeda with Kevin Sorbo. Yeah.
She was in the second and third Matrix movies.
Yes.
She did an episode of CSI. She was in Angel. She did a couple episodes of The Shield. She did an episode of Without a Trace. She was in I Think I Love My Wife. She did an episode of Boston Legal, an episode of Bones, an episode of Criminal Minds. Right. So you have seen or heard her before if you have watched anything at all in the last 15, 20 years.
Well, that's funny because I always kind of, and I should have picked up on that, but I'm so used to Aisha Tyler being so, she's been in video games and stuff like that. So when I hear that voice, I think,
it was a similar voice a little bit to Aisha Tyler.
So that's nice that they got Gina Torres because it's, again, I always kind of jokingly referred to, the early Rebels. It was kind of like a preteen version of Firefly. Mm-hmm. And so she was such a big part of Firefly. And her character actually was more like, oh gosh, I don't even remember the name of her character on Firefly. But she was like Nathan Fillion's second in command, but she really was kind of the brains of the operation. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what, like Kanan is the impulsive, even though he's supposed to be a Jedi and he's supposed to be on that, but he's the impulsive, he's the emotional, and then Hera is the brains, who's really putting, like, hey, don't be an idiot, let's stop and think this out kind of thing, which is that kind of relationship that they kind of have cribbed a little bit for Rebels. And also, of course, what's his face is going to be in Rogue One as a motion capture character who was in Firefly as well.
Oh God, what is his name?
Tudyk.
We've said his name. Yeah,
Alan Tudyk.
Yeah.
So that's kind of funny that
Yeah.
That's a thing that, well, maybe Star Wars has done a little bit. Obviously, casting Peter Cushing in the. Peter Cushing as he played a villain in so many Hammer movies, and then later on having his old compatriot Christopher Lee. So I guess casting icons of genre, and I guess I would consider Alan Tudyk and Gina Torres because of people loving Firefly, them being kind of icons of this kind of entertainment. So I guess it's a good nod.
Yeah, and I mean,
but I didn't think her character was that great.
Yeah, people who, like you said, people have specifically this, the kind of science fiction genre, have experience doing that. And Gina Torres, she's done a voice on the Justice League cartoon and everything, right? So she keeps her hand in this kind of stuff too. And so, it makes sense that the people who, and especially the people who worked on Firefly, the cast, they've gotten so many other gigs since then.
Right.
And they're sort of known commodities. So it makes sense that they would work their way back towards this kind of stuff. I mean, so thinking about these episodes just a little bit more, you mentioned the first season, and starting with, like Empire Day forward, it was pretty much one story. It was the story of this group and coming up against the Empire. And now that they have left Lethal, they're kind of more out in the universe, and they're picking up people here and there that are sort of joining, they're in a bigger fight now, right? They've joined up with Phoenix Squadron. They're kind of taking it to the Empire on a larger scale than they were on Lothal. It makes sense that they would then kind of meet more people, bring more people into the fold, or at least come in contact with, more folks in various ways. And so I get that part of it. It's just striking, I think, that they're kind of doing that on an individual level, rather than, whereas in the first season, Lando showed up and he met everyone, right? They all met Lando at the same time. Whereas now, Hondo, I don't think has met any of the rest. He just met Ezra. And then I guess at the end of the episode, he showed up.
Yeah, he did show up
because the ship brought him back. But, it wasn't as if the entire crew of the Ghost had an adventure with Hondo, or, the entire crew of the Ghosts, kind of encountered Ketsu Onyo and had to compete with this bounty hunter who happened to know Sabine, right? It was just Sabine who dealt with her, and Ezra a little bit. But, eventually they're going to have to bring everyone back together. It right now it just feels a little more disjointed than the first season did. And I would say that the way they're going about it now is not unusual for shows like this. I mean, it's pretty standard that, each character kind of gets their own episode to shine. It's just the fact that they're not doing it within the context of the Ghost crew. They're doing it sort of on their own individually. That I think, it's certainly a change from the first season, and it's.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would have liked it. Maybe I would have liked Blood Sisters better if they had maybe.
Right, if they had come upon the Gonk droid. Everyone had come on the Gonk droid, and they had to ferry it to Alderaan, and then Ketsu Ono comes in, and rather than competing, Ketsu Ono trying to board the Star Tours shuttle that they brought back, that she had to fly against the Ghost and how that worked, and it would have been a different story, certainly.
And they could have examined the ideas that she'd had about this idea that this woman was her sister, in an organization. They're not biologically sisters, and her prejudices against this person about like seeing like, well, this person, maybe Ketsu Ono doesn't have the capacity to be a rebel, that kind of idea. It would have been nice to have. I honestly, for the life of me, can't really think about what Ezra's. Mm-hmm. No, Ezra isn't on. He goes along, doesn't he? On the mission. He
starts going along as backup, but then right. So the specifics of the episode. So Sabine and Ezra go to this hangar where the shuttle comes in from Coruscant. They find the Gonk droid, which has the information. Ketsu Onyo also finds them, tries to take the Gonk droid from them. Then stormtroopers show up because there's this disturbance, and they're past curfew. They get into a firefight, and at that point, Ezra gets left behind, and so the rest of the episode.
I was wondering.
So he's there at the beginning. He encounters Ketsu Onyo for a few minutes, but then he comes back in the end. He was like, "Oh, remember me? I met you in the hangar or whatever."
I just think it would have been interesting if they'd had some kind of like the idea that maybe Ezra was, Sabine is like, I don't like this person, blah blah blah. She's bad news, and just to having the idea that maybe somebody would see something in this Ketsu Ono character that would lead to her. Eventually, it's like, I don't know, there's something about her that I think she might be the person we'd
Maybe
need.
she had her reasons for leaving you, and it wasn't personal.
And it just seemed like it was kind of like they had this whole like interaction, and there was no third person to kind of bring it out for us to hear about it, to understand. Right. And I think that the idea...
Yeah, and again, this is, I think, a problem that they've had a little bit... in this season is that they're telling us stuff instead of showing us.
Yes.
In some ways. Like, they're just like, where, right, they're just like kind of, the exchange of dialogue between Sabine and Ketsu that kind of led to Ketsu saying like, yeah, okay, I'll let you go and I'll help you escape from this and I won't try to get the information. It was done through dialogue rather than some kind of scene or some kind of action that that sort of let that play out over a longer period of time rather than just like an exchange of dialogue, a couple lines, and then Ketsu going like, yeah, okay, you're right, whatever. There could be multiple scenes of them working together or struggling against each other or struggling against, the Empire trying to take them over that could have let it develop over time. We could have been shown that this change rather than just sort of being told like, oh, okay, so I'm changing my mind now. You're good to go.
Yeah, I mean, if you have another person, or even like if you could have combined maybe Blood Sisters with Wings of the Master, it might have been. I don't know actually how you could have done that though. But
I get it. Well, because Sabine goes with Hera to Shantipole, so she just would have not gone with them, right? Hera would have taken Zeb.
Right.
And Hera would have taken Zeb. Sabine would have gone off with Ezra and Chopper, I guess. And Kanan would have been left with Phoenix Squadron, and you could have just done it that way. Yeah,
and just the idea that if they're wanting to present Rebels as this, it's a story about a ragtag group that come together to fight the Empire. They're making a pretty good case for the fact that they are not really a team anymore. That they're having these experiences on their own, and we're not. And whether or not they're having growth or not is somewhat immaterial because it's not getting filtered back into the group experience. I mean, if they're
and we're 4 episodes in, so I assume that will come eventually,
right?
But until it happens, then we're left with this kind of disjointed.
It's kind of like,
when are they going to work together again?
Well, it's like I just feel like they missed some opportunities. It's like one of my big pet peeves with Wings of the Master. One, I was kind of disappointed that we didn't really get as. I mean, I liked the idea that Hera kind of explained about what she had to sacrifice to follow her dreams. I mean, I think that's a realistic message. It's not, it's actually kind of a grown-up message, even though the way she states it is very simple. That, you can't always have your cake and eat it too. It's like, well, I want to have my friends and my family and stuff, but I also have this dream. So unfortunately, I have to prioritize my dream over my family and friends. I had to leave my planet. And I think in the end, she was like, and I'm glad I did because this was important. But so you have that great message. But then they also so this is all about that she's a great pilot, and they get to show off this iconic Return of the Jedi ship that is kind of like the kind of the black sheep of the Wing family because it only shows up there. And then what do they take it to a planet that's like mostly covered in mist?
Right.
And then she does all these great maneuvers, but it's like half of it's obscured by the fact that she's in clouds and you don't actually get to see a lot of it. And it's kind of like, wait a second.
Yeah.
It's like, why did you do that? It's kind of, it's.
Yeah. And again, right, her explaining why she is a pilot, it was just a line of dialogue that took, 5 seconds rather than her showing, her showing it through action. Or even seeing, a scene play out where, she kind of develops that, like a flashback or something where she,
Yeah, I mean, it would have been nice to have really understood, like, maybe what she was losing by making that. It's kind of one of that, it's like making a hard decision, but with no consequences. It's... Yeah,
I mean, I will say, the Wings of the Master episode, I loved... the actual scenes of her flying the B-Wing on Shandapul are great, and they're probably, my favorite scenes of the season so far, certainly. But there is one thing, I think I've talked about this before, where, when she's on Shandapul, like, that B-Wing's moving, and, it's really windy there, so it's going at a pretty good clip. But then in the beginning of that episode, you have the Phoenix Squadron's A-Wings that are trying to get past this blockade, and they can't even outrun a regular TIE fighter. So they've, like, weirdly made the A-Wings really slow for some reason.
Right.
And it feels a little off for me, because the A-Wings are supposed to be, kind of the hot rods, the really fast fighters of the Rebel fleet, and maybe that comes later. Maybe they're like, well, we tweaked them, so now they're faster, but...
and the B-Wing was
like the slow bomber,
but had a lot of power. Yeah, the Y-Wing and this thing had has that 4-part weapon or whatever 3-part weapon that kind of that was kind of a weird reshuffling of the of their what do you call it? It's like their character sheet from Dungeons and Dragons or whatever. Like, we re-rolled the B-Wing, and actually it's much more, even though it has a lot more artifice, and then the pilot is going to have to constantly, when they're flying, they're going to have to, think about their forward motion and constantly reorientate their brain as to where is the position of the rest of the ship, because you can't, it's hard for, I get the idea from the cockpit that you actually can't see where your ship is. So you're actually controlling the axis of the spaceship while you're controlling its forward motion, which actually I think would make it, like, you would have to be someone like Hera, who is like a great pilot, because anything less, you'd forget. You wouldn't think of it in balance. You'd be thinking about your speed when you should be thinking about the pitch and the yaw, and then boom, you'd hit something. And maybe they didn't do such a good job. Well, no, they did kind of emphasize that she was probably the only person who could do this.
Yeah.
I mean, and I like the idea that the only problem is that they did kind of, in the structure, they betrayed the under the gun concept of, like, that part of it was that part of it they knew that there was a chance that she wouldn't be able to
make it back
in time for this bombing run or whatever, or to this thing. But then when she, like, reports back, she doesn't actually, she's like, oh, it works pretty good, kind of thing. And it's like, well, they're kind of
right.
It doesn't really bring up the concept that I think that character would be much more, like, ready to go before she even maybe thought she was ready. She'd be like, oh, it's not ready. I still need to do this, and this. Is like, no, we got to go now. I'll risk it. And there was a weird kind of,
I mean, they played up this urgency in the beginning of the episode, and then at the end there was this kind of lack of that same urgency.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And maybe maybe we're nitpicking a kids show, but if you're going to tell us, if you're going to start putting this out there as, if you want to get the whole story, you're going to have to watch these things too.
Right. Well, I mean, it's fun to talk about, fun to think about.
Yeah.
So then the other two things we're going to talk about this week were the recent comics, and then you played Battlefront. Did you actually get a chance to read Star Wars number 12?
I did not, but we can just go forward on it, and all right. We'll just go with your comments because.
Okay. So I guess last week, Vader, Star Wars number 12, and then the first issue of the Vader Down crossover were released. In the Star Wars titles, so everyone now was on Nar Shaddaa. Luke was, I guess, captured by Gracchus the Hutt, and who is maybe the worst Hutt since Zorbo or whatever his name was from the Clone Wars. Like,
hey everybody, what's going on?
Instead of a mincing Hutt, we get this like weird hulked out, super strong, super muscly Hutt who walks on metal spider legs. And like, I don't want either one. Like, just give me whatever's in the middle of those two extremes.
Exactly.
So anyway, so they escape from Nar Shaddaa, in part because the Empire shows up and causes chaos in the arena where Luke was fighting some monster. And then, of course, Gracchus the Hutt is a collector of Jedi artifacts, and so R2-D2 is there, finds the cache of old lightsabers, and just like passes them out like they're Halloween candy. Or, you know, like he's Oprah, and you're like, you get a lightsaber, and you get a lightsaber, and you... Right, so you have Han and Leia with lightsabers now, you know, and along with Luke fighting stuff. And so they leave. I don't know if that is meant to be an echo of the end of Attack of the Clones, where you had the scene on Geonosis with, you know, all the Jedi, you know, fighting with their lightsabers. So I don't know if it was meant to be an echo of that, or if it was just a fun idea that they had. Well, fun depending on how you look at it. You know, an idea of like, oh, let's give Han a lightsaber. We've already had, you know, Luke fighting Boba Fett. Like, the next step is to give Han a lightsaber and have him fighting her. And, you know, you had Leia saying like, oh, I always wanted to use one of these, which is a little on the nose, but it's consistent, I think, with at least the Star Wars movie tone. You find out that the Game Master, which I still say is a dumb name.
That's a total 70s Marvel Comics kind of idea.
Right. Who is Gracchus the Hutt's, like, he was working for Gracchus the Hutt. It turns out he's actually an Imperial spy or something. He's Vader's henchman. He's codenamed Vader's Fist. Vader's Fist. And at the end, Vader's like, tell me everything about the prisoner or whatever. You find out that Sana, her last name is Staros, so she's not actually married to Han Solo. I know it's a big twist. No one saw that coming. Turns out she's not actually Han Solo's wife. Her name's Sana Staros. Again, I kind of want them to keep that character around because I think she could be a really interesting character. But I'm sure we're not going to see her again, like, ever.
Right.
Like, the odds. It actually would be really neat if she showed up in like episode 8 or 9, just as like a character who helps them out or something. But yeah, I have a feeling we're not going to see that character again for a very, very long time.
Exactly.
So, you know, it just kind of ends. You know, they escaped. Vader's like, tell me everything about Skywalker. And then, you know, they're ready. I guess it kind of puts an ending on it before this Vader Down crossover, and then they'll pick back up afterwards. And I'm actually, so reading that and then immediately reading Vader Down, I got confused again about the timeline of these two comics, and because they both take place between A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back. But I can't quite figure out now if they're supposed to be happening at the same time. I can't imagine that they are. I think Star Wars might take place like a little bit before the events of the Darth Vader comic now, because so in Vader Down, which is essentially the next issue of the Darth Vader comic, you know, Vader's still looking for Luke Skywalker. He has a source who told them he was on some other planet that's not Nar Shaddaa. So Vader goes there in his own, you know, his personal TIE fighter. He runs into basically the Rebel fleet who were there for training exercises, which includes Luke Skywalker, because Luke is still Red 5 at this point.
What issue is this? I think I've read the wrong.
It's called Vader Down #1.
Oh, jeez. I didn't read it. Sorry.
It's the only it's the only comic I think that's going to be that have the title of Vader Down, because then hang on, let me pull it up, because they put the list of this storyline of all the comics in the storyline at the end of the Star Wars title. So just give me a minute. But it's like Vader Down number 1, and then it's going to jump back over to Star Wars number 13, and then Darth Vader number 13 or 14. You know, so this is the only comic that's actually going to be called Vader Down, even though that's the name of this storyline.
Yeah, see, I read Darth Vader 11, so I think I didn't read any.
So
of these.
You're one behind. Then,
I'm sorry.
No, it's not. I mean, it's not your fault. They did not make this clear at all. They said it was going to be called Vader Down, but they didn't actually. I guess they did, but you and I just don't pay that much attention.
This is the kind of thing that killed my interest in comics when I was in high school. Is this you got to go and hunt down issues to get the whole story?
So it's a 6-part. It's a 6-part crossover story. Vader Down number 1 is part 1. Darth Vader number 13 is part 2. Star Wars number 13 is part 3.
Ugh.
Darth Vader number 14 is part 4. Star Wars number 14 is part 5. And Darth Vader number 15 is part 6. So, again, this is the part 1 of the story is the only issue that's actually called Vader Down. So it's called Vader Down. I'll just continue. Because, you know, he's there. Darth Vader's there. He runs into the entire Rebel fleet. He manages to destroy, like, an entire, you know, squadron of Y-Wings or something. Luke Skywalker goes after him, manages to, like, clip his ship, and so both Vader and Luke crash land on this planet. Of course, the Rebels have ground troops there as well, so they, at the end of Vader Down number 1, they were closing in on Darth Vader, and Darth Vader, the assumption is he's basically just going to kill everyone until he finds Luke Skywalker. So that's Vader Down. I mean, it's a really good issue for setting up the story. The only thing that confused me was, like, again, just the timeline of does this take place before the Star Wars comic or after the Star Wars? It must take place after the Star Wars comic.
They don't give you any indicator.
I had thought for a while that they were like concurrent stories, but I guess not.
See, they used to do like little bubbles on these things, like this story takes place before this issue. That's the way they would kind of soften the blow of having to run around for buying 6 different issues to get a story.
Yeah, I guess they still do put out, occasionally they update the canon timeline of, like, this comic takes place before that comic, but they don't do it for individual issues. They just say, you know, the Star Wars comic takes place before the events of the Kanan comic or whatever.
They should have, like, the equivalent for, like, a slide rule, so you can just, like, do your math. Because I've had this problem with the timeline too, when I was all excited a month or so ago, when the idea that we thought that Diego Luna might be playing Biggs Darklighter, when I kind of realized that it's probably not possible. Yeah, because the idea that unless they want to completely discount the deleted, yet it feels like canon, even though it's never been in any of the movies. The whole Luke having a conversation with Biggs at at Tashi Station or whatever, right, or Anchorhead, I guess it was.
Yeah.
The time frame would be because he'd actually have seen the battle that day. That, you know, unless the whole Rogue One thing takes place way before A New Hope or something.
I mean, apparently Rogue One, the end of Rogue One, is going to lead right into the beginning of A New Hope.
Right.
So, and I would bet, since this was, I can't even remember his name. John, the ILM guy, John
Knoll.
Knoll, yes, thank you. Right, since this is his story, he would, you know, he's a big Star Wars guy. He would be aware of, you know, the deleted scene, and he probably wouldn't want to, like, encroach on that. But at what point this story got kind of taken out of his hands and put into the Lucasfilm, I would imagine the Lucasfilm group too is like, no, because Biggs was there, and, you know, we know, you know, they probably wouldn't want to infringe on that story too much.
Yeah, it's probably just a matter of, like, oh, we just gave him that haircut and that mustache because that was the fashion that year or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Sorry, that's a diversion.
That's all right.
Like I said, I do have, but the timeline thing kind of constantly, when I start to speculate, it becomes this issue constantly that I'm trying to like the 30 years between episode 6 and 7, and then the 20 years between episode 3 and 4, and it's like I'm accidentally putting one in front of the other. It's like, ugh.
Yeah. So so you hadn't read the comics.
I haven't read any of these,
but that was the Star Wars title. It looks great. The story I haven't been that crazy about so far. I talked last week about how I got in this frame of mind where like, okay, this is one of those fun older like 70s Marvel kind of stories, and so that kind of salvaged it a little bit. But the whole Sana Solo thing, I wasn't that crazy about, and but I've really enjoyed the Darth Vader comic. I think it looks great, and it's a good story, and so. Vader Down, it certainly starts really well, and so I'm looking. Hopefully, it goes well from there.
Yeah, I think a lot of obviously, again, I hadn't read this, but I did read what led up to it. You got to take your hats off the idea that if these comics had come out in the fall of 1977, I think I would have enjoyed them a lot more. Because that whole idea that, does Han Solo have a wife? Well, maybe he does. But right. Considering we have, another 3 movies spanning 35 years and whatnot, and we all know, right. It's just not true.
Well, and where her name is never mentioned, this is a completely new character. Like, they never even mentioned her, or even they never even alluded to, remember that woman who pretended to be your wife? Right. None of that in any of the movies.
Yeah, so it's just like I don't know, it just ruins it, since that the fact that there's no idea, no concept that it's true, it just kind of ruins it for me.
Yeah.
Otherwise, there is a very kind of 70s feel to the Darth Vader comics. I was thinking about, what if something like this had been a TV show, and they had said let's make a couple of these into some TV movies between the movies. So there'd be a Darth Vader looking, and I forget what's the guy's name who's the Imperial with the mutton chops.
I can't remember his name either.
Well, he's
and the monocle.
Yeah. So I was thinking, you said you kind of always, from your art, you thought he was a person of color, but it kind of, from image to image, it's hard for me to get an idea. But I was just thinking, if it had been the TV, it had been made in the 70s and had been made for TV, it would have been like Ray Walston. It would have played him. Would have been he would have been kind of like a proto Mr. Hand, kind of bitching out Darth Vader from time to time, which would have been completely had have been a perfect kind of thing, because he was doing sci-fi movies around that time. I just like that idea when he, in issue 11, when he helps his Vader helps his assistant escape, because initially he was going to kill her, right, and then changes, and then something happens, and then the idea.
Well, she's the one with the information,
right? She's not. She's not going to give him the info, and then the whole thing about traps. It's just, I just, for some reason, I can't help but think of Ray Walston, circa Popeye, circa Galaxy of Terror, circa Fast Times at Ridgemont High, with big mutton chops.
Yeah.
But
so one thing you have been doing that I have not been doing is playing Battlefront.
Yes.
How is Battlefront? I will say that I have seen mixed reviews on this. I have seen some people say this is super fun. I've seen some people say this is kind of a slog. How has your Battlefront experience been?
I would say overall my Battlefront experience has been mediocre. Technically, the game works perfect. I've never had any issues, no glitches, no crashes, no. It's a multiplayer game, so another thing, another big issue is lag, which is when if there's any kind of informational lag between the server that you're playing on and your machine, a game like this becomes almost impossible to enjoy, because what'll happen is you'll shoot at somebody and then they'll zoom across the map.
Yeah.
So that being said, because EA has always gotten a lot of crap for having bad servers and stuff. That stuff's all rock solid. Mm-hmm. Not my complaint. And, you know, what Wall Street Journal, I think, and Forbes and a lot of other reviewers have basically pointed to is that the real disappointment is the overall superficiality of the game. Mm-hmm. We all know that there's no first person campaign. There are a lot of there's tutorial levels like run to this point and then use your gun and shoot this probe droid. You're doing great. Now go to the next thing. And there's those kind of games, and then there's survival where you if you have another person, you can team up and they do a thing where you can go to end and play until you die kind of thing, and then you get so many points and then the unlocks. It's just the superficiality of the game is one of those things. Like, one, don't buy a console for this game. Do not waste your money. You know, if you're not a person who plays video games and you just want to experience it. Although the superficiality might be good, because if you're not particularly familiar with the way of what games can offer you, you might not pick up on the fact you're really not getting a lot. I mean, if I want to contrast that with a game that came out a week previous that I haven't had a lot of time to play, which is Fallout, which is a totally different type of game. It's an RPG kind of thing. I mean, people are putting are going to put 200 hours into that thing. Now, first-person shooters, you can put 200 hours too, but the maps are so small. Like you get on there and you go, oh my god, this is fantastic. You're in Mos Eisley, and the Millennium Falcon is right there, and you're running around going down hallways of like Docking Bay 94 or whatever, or you're fighting underneath a sand crawler that's kind of half stuck on a hill, and you're seeing all kinds of little things on the cliff faces of Tatooine, and you're like, oh man, I really love it. You're never going to access any of that. You can't. You're on the rails, kind of like the maps have paths that you can follow, and they're very simplistic paths, and it looks like Star Wars. It kind of feels like Star Wars, but it just it's not a game that you're going to spend 100 hours with. And for the amount of money that they're asking, I mean, out the door, it's a $60 game, if that's with no discounts. And then, the first thing you do when you open it up, there is a big piece of paper advertising for this thing that if you're not a gamer, it's the bane of your existence. It's the season pass, where it's basically, hey, why don't you pay another $50 or $60 and get the other half of the game?
Yeah,
because that's what they're doing. They're basically games now are $110. It's any kind of game like this is essentially $110. You pay $60 for the game, and then they want you to throw in another $50 for more maps, more game modes. I mean, you do get Jakku free, which we'll be getting on the 8th of December. Which, I'm not that excited about, because if you're on this stringent kind of small map ideas, it's like you're not. Sullust is that map. I will say I didn't get to play every. It's like 4 planets, but I think there's 4 maps or something within each planet. And because I was playing, I was just on the random selector. It would select what you're going to play next. I didn't get to play everything. I did get to get in the ships a little bit. I found them at first blush to be very hard to control, and it was just, it wasn't a very natural experience where you actually felt you were, spaceships I don't think are really meant to be flying right up against rock outcropping. So it's like you have to be very subtle but the way you fly, otherwise you're just going to die constantly. Honestly, I was really disappointed. I'm not so angry that, like, a lot of people are like, I sold my game. I sold it right away so I could get the maximum value for it. because I was so disappointed. But it's literally the kind of game where you could sit down and play it for 20 minutes and then not play it again for 2 weeks, and you wouldn't be really penalized. So if that's the way you like to play a game, if you're the kind of person that like you know maybe you buy 2-3 games a year, you play Madden, you play your football, and you're like I want a shooter that I can just kind of jump into, then maybe this would be the kind of game for you. They're in that position where they have to, you have to pay all these actors to be in these things, and they do these commercials with movie quality special effects. You got to make a game that's going to appeal to the widest variety of players. So I can't honestly, I would not say, oh, I'm a hardcore gamer and all this stuff, but I'm much more comfortable in the world of knowing what you can, basically most games are open world now. So where it's like, even if you're like, well, I don't know, I don't want to play the objective, I'm just going to go explore my world. And there's no more situation than in Star Wars than the idea of being able to go and explore the world on your own would be more appealing. And I think that's all the way so much more frustrating that there's no like little extras. It's like, you're running down hallways on Hoth base, and it's like, it would be fun that, there was an Easter egg, like maybe if, once or twice every time during a match, like you'd be down a corridor and the ice would break and a Wampa would come out and grab you or something. Just little flourishes that they didn't seem to want to add. And it was kind of like, I found myself, literally playing this game longer than I wanted to, because I was like, well, I'm going to be talking about it on Monday, so I really should be playing it. And the unlocks and things like that are just, it's kind of like you have these power-ups or whatever that you have, and you have a card, like a hand of 3 cards, and they're timed by and how many points, and then I can throw a thermal detonator, I can throw a shield, I can use a gun that has a one-hit kill. I guess having that being said, I guess it doesn't really surprise me if at first when I was like playing the beta and I was all annoyed, and then I had to go back and think about what Battlefront is, and Battlefront is a pretty superficial. Was a pretty superficial game on the original Xbox. It was just a lot of cheap kills. I mean, that was before they kind of gotten the idea that video games were going to be mainly an online experience for people. So you would actually be playing against the computer and not knowing it, because it would manufacture like fake gamer tags for you to play against. Whereas this game, you're always playing against another person. But I mean, I guess
so let me. I mean, how easy or difficult is it to complete one of these, campaigns? Not even the huge multiplayer ones, but
there is no campaign. That's
not the campaigns, but the different, the games you play, the like capture the flag stuff, or the coordinate the Y-wing bomber attack, because when hearing how you're talking about it, I mean, it does sound like something that might appeal to me. It's someone who, my experience with video games kind of seriously ended a very long time ago, and the Star Wars games that I have played are X-Wing and TIE Fighter and Rogue Squadron, those kinds of games where you can put it down for a long time and come back to it and just continue your missions, whatever. But there's a bunch of them, right? You have to do like 20 or 30 different things just to get the end, rather than have only, this sounds like it's more limited in that sense, where there are only 4 maps unless you want to pay for more of them. So is it at least, if you are someone who is going to put this down for a while and come back to it, is it something that's going to be like, wow, this is really frustrating, and I'll be rewarded for playing the same map over and over because it's going to take me that long to actually complete it? Or is it something where like,
I can't.
It just took me like 2 days to figure out how to beat this thing on this particular map, so I don't know what to do now.
Yeah, I think it's just the kind of it's almost a throwback in the way that people experience games. I mean, the unlocks, once you get the jetpack, I guess there's really not anything that's going to change your experience. If you bought it and played it for a week and then came back 4 months from now, I think the only I think other than having to download a bunch of updates, which would take forever. Yeah. It's just like you might once the DLC starts coming out, then that's when you start to find, like, you'll probably walk into maps and there'll be like 2 other people there. And that's the number one problem with games now. It used to be like, well, it doesn't matter if I play the game now or I play the game in 6 months, the experience is going to be the same. Well, that's not the way it is with multiplayer games because things come around so fast. There'll be something else that's un-Star Wars related that everybody will be playing, and so then you'll walk into a match or the DLC comes out and then everybody will be like, oh, well, there's a Bespin level or something. And they'll all be playing that Bespin, and when you try to get in there, it'll say, hey, you don't have that map. Do you want to buy a $50 season pass to play with other people? Otherwise, you're going to be running around. And that's another thing. I honestly, the one thing I would say on the server side is that, it's 20 on 20, I think. Like, I would actually I would run around for 2 or 3 minutes without finding anybody to fight.
Yeah.
And it was nice because I got to explore, the stuff. But it tends that people, even on these small maps, would kind of sit in the corner. And because it's so easy to die in this game, there's no way, a lot of Battlefield games, you work as a crew. You have a 4-person team, and it's like, I'm going to be the heavy infantry guy. I have grenades. I have grenade launchers. I'm the guy that has bullets. I can give everybody bullets. I'm the guy or the girl that can give you health. And there's that whole aspect doesn't exist. So there's no team working. It's just a cheap death. It's like you can die 20 times in the game and it doesn't feel like you're being penalized, or it's just the depth. I just, maybe if you're a person who literally, but do you really want to spend like $300 for that's going to be $300 this week because they're on sale, but usually it's like $350 for a console, $50 to $60 to be online, and then another $60 to play this game. I would not suggest doing all of that for this game. Because I just don't think you're going to get your value for your money. It's not like there are games out there where people go, I bought this console to play this one game, and then you could play it forever. It's kind of like, when I got an Xbox 360, and then some people are like, hey, you guys playing Battlefield? And I'm like, no, it's not really my thing. And then they said, no, there's a free demo, and we tried it, and I got hooked. That was the only game I played. I didn't buy any games. For like 2 years, I didn't buy anything but Battlefield 3. I didn't feel like I needed anything else because there was always a gun to unlock. There was always a piece of something to unlock. There was always like, if you kill 50 enemies with a melee move, which that means just hitting somebody with your fist or something. You unlock this thing, it's the unlocks that keep people coming back and playing these games over and over. So I mean, I'm taking forever to answer this. Maybe this might be more of a casual game kind of situation where if someone knows, I just want to play some Star Wars. I just don't want to I don't want to walk into a situation where I'm getting my ass handed to me all the time. Then Battlefront might be my thing. Is like, it's got the music, it's got some stuff I get to play for 20 minutes, and then I'm going to go watch TV. I don't want to spend 4 hours with this. Then I would say that this might be worth it to you. But I'd also wait a little bit because I feel like the price is going to go down in a month. That the sales are going to drop off because of the kind of the mixed reviews. Yeah. I mean, having played things like loving stuff like Jedi Knight and Knights of the Old Republic, and I was one of those guys who bought everything Star Wars. I think I've bought 95% of all the console Star Wars games that ever came out. I would just, I would say looking at that continuum, even with some of the really bad Phantom Menace games that came out, I would still call this gameplay wise a disappointment. I mean, it looks great. It's just, it's almost, it's like, but I think maybe I've gotten spoiled with the idea that, I'm playing this game that's, it's called Metal Gear Solid 5, the Phantom Pain, and it's this, it's this masterpiece kind of game that it's like a once in a lifetime. This guy Hideo Kojima has been developing it for 5 years, and I mean it was such a big deal that it actually had something to do with him actually breaking off from the host company that publishes this game, because he's this auteur kind of thing, and it's an open world. And I played this game for like a month and a half, and I was barely playing the main objectives, because it's like it's all about sneaking and infiltrating, and there's there's humorous aspects to it, and there's just like so much that you could play it forever. There's an economy to the game, and that and for me, for a game like that, and I'm never gonna. And yes, there are aspects that you could down the line pay money to expand your game. So, I mean, that's the reality of gameplay now. But Star Wars, it's like for the initial investment of the $60, how little you actually get, it's really disheartening.
Yeah. Oh, that's unfortunate.
Maybe in the future they'll do a combo deal. If like they usually always do Game of the Year editions where you buy the game for $50 or $60 or $10 over list, and then you get the season pass thrown in. Maybe that would be a better deal. But I honestly, it's like I played it on Saturday for about 2 hours, and then I'm totally not even that excited about going back and playing it anymore. So,
all right.
I know. I feel very negative about it, but
well, you're not the only one, and that is not the most negative review I have seen or heard of this game. So,
yeah, it's just it's just like the little. A lot of LucasArts, when LucasArts was still around, they would put in little flourishes and little things that would just kind of suck you in, and I feel like that's just not in here. It's just not. It's not an essential part of your preparation. If you're going, I'm really excited about The Force Awakens, and I really want something to kind of heighten my wait, my 24-day wait. It's like, go buy a comic, go buy a book.
Yeah.
Go watch Rebels. I think Rebels would make a better, even go back and watch the Clone Wars, because that's going to give you, fill you more of a kind of this feeling of like, this is the universe we're going to be walking into, or it's the music, it's the time and the care they take that I feel just that, DICE or EA didn't really put into this.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I got to say about that.
All right.
Well, so I think we kind of run out of our topics.
Yeah, I think we can wrap it up.
Yeah. So if you want to interact with us online, we are at the Twitters. At Talking Birdcast on Twitter. You can email us and complain about my review of Battlefront at talkingbirdcast@gmail.com. We have a Tumblr at talkingbirdStarWars.tumblr.com.
Yep. We have
a Facebook like page that's kind of hasn't been kept up because as far as listeners go, we haven't gotten a ton of likes on it. So maybe Facebook fan pages, facebook.com Talking Bird Podcast.
Mm-hmm. Give it a like.
You give it a like.
Give a repost.
You can complain about us over there, and I know some podcasts have very very active Facebook pages, and I guess maybe we're just not. We're just not there. I mean, it's bad enough. I was thinking about when I was talking about that Battlefront was coming out, and I was like, yeah, come and find me. And then I didn't really tell you my gamer tag or anything, which is kind of like, yeah, obviously I don't really want to play video games with anybody. So I do apologize to listeners if anybody actually felt like I was kind of playing a game with them. I guess video games are kind of just like, playing online with people, I want to relax.
Mm-hmm.
I don't need people saying like you breathe through your nose too much when you're on that podcast or something like that,
Right.
So you know how to get a hold of us.
At this point,
we're gonna be back. I'm pretty sure we're gonna be back next week because we're on the home stretch. I guess maybe we'll talk a little bit of. I don't know. Are you on a complete no commercials, avoiding clips on the internet?
I'm trying to. I'm finding it much harder than I expected.
Did you happen to see the Finn lightsaber thing?
You mean him against the stormtrooper?
Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I actually do have thoughts about that.
Yeah, so we'll definitely talk about that next week. So I guess that's about it. I want to wish everybody, all of our United States listeners, a healthy and happy Thanksgiving.
Mm-hmm.
Enjoy that turkey. Make sure you rub some butter on the cavity or whatever. I hope all your sides are the sides that you like, done the way you like them. Yeah. And for Talking Birdcast, I have been Robert Zachary.
I remain John Llewellyn.
Thanks for listening, and may the force be with you.